The bullet shattered the farmhouse window with surgical precision, splitting Sarah's meatloaf in half before embedding itself in the ancient oak table. The 12-year-old's scream pierced the evening air as ceramic shards scattered across the floor. But John Mason didn't flinch. He reached across the table, plucked the still warm round from the wood, and rolled it between calloused fingers. Russian-made 7.62 Kex-54R, fired from a Dragunov. Amateur work. The shooter had deliberately missed. In his 20 years as Delta Force's most lethal operator, Mason had seen enough warning shots to know this was just the beginning. He met his daughter's terrified eyes across the table and forced a reassuring smile. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sheriff Mike Hawkins' truck kicked up dust as it rumbled down Mason's driveway, its weathered blue paint almost gray in the afternoon sun. Mason watched from the porch, noting how the usually laid-back lawman's shoulders were tight with tension. Something had spooked him. "John," Hawkins called out, climbing down from his truck. "Got a minute?" Mason gestured toward the porch chairs, already pouring 2 glasses of lemonade from the pitcher Sarah had left out. "What brings you out here, Mike?" The sheriff settled into the creaking chair, removing his hat to wipe his brow. "Rising snake. Hit the Peterson place last night. Cleaned them out. Beat old Tom pretty bad when he tried to stop them." Mason's hand tightened imperceptibly around his glass. The Petersons' farm was less than 20 miles away. "Tom going to make it?" "Yeah. But he's not good. Martha said there were at least 12 of them. Military gear, night vision, radio discipline. This ain't your typical meth head crew, John." Hawkins leaned forward, lowering his voice. "They're moving in a pattern, hitting the isolated places. First, your farm's likely next on their list." Through the kitchen window, Mason could see Sarah doing her homework at the table. She looked up, waved, then returned to her books. "What aren't you telling me, Mike?" The sheriff sighed, aged beyond his years by recent events. "Got a call from the FBI this morning. These boys, they're not just thieves. They're looking for something specific. Or someone." He met Mason's eyes. "They're asking questions about military personnel in the area." Mason kept his face carefully neutral, but his mind was already racing through scenarios, contingencies, escape routes. "Not many ex-military around here except old Bill Thompson, and he was Air Force Supply Corps, John." Hawkins hesitated. "I know we don't talk about what you did before moving here, but if there's anything I should know..." "Nothing that would interest common thieves," Mason replied smoothly, but his eyes were scanning the tree line, picking out the glint of binoculars in the afternoon sun. They were being watched right now. The sheriff nodded slowly, accepting the non-answer. "I've got 3 deputies total, John, against 12 or more heavily armed men." He trailed off, the math obvious and grim. "You focus on protecting the town. Mike, I can handle my own property." Something in Mason's tone made Hawkins study him more carefully. "Just don't do anything that'll have the feds crawling all over my county. Bad enough having to deal with FBI pencil pushers." Mason smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Wouldn't dream of it." After the sheriff left, Mason walked the property again, this time with different eyes. He noted blind spots, approached vectors, defensive positions. The farm's security system was sophisticated but subtle. Motion sensors disguised as irrigation monitors, cameras hidden in birdhouses, pressure plates beneath innocent-looking garden paths. Sarah found him in the barn later, moving heavy equipment against the walls. "Dad? Jenny from school said her uncle's farm got robbed. Are the bad men coming here too?" Mason stopped, crouching down to her level. "Some people might try to cause trouble, yes. But that's why we have our special rules and games, remember?" She nodded solemnly. "If I hear the owl call at night, go to the basement and don't come out until you or Ms. Thompson get me." And if I can't get to the basement, the hollow tree by the creek, Mason finished. Good girl. He pulled her into a hug, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. Nothing's going to happen to you, Sarah, I promise. That evening, as Sarah slept, Mason made a call on a phone that officially didn't exist. The number connected to a private exchange in Virginia, where a bored-sounding operator asked for a verification code that had last been used during Operation Black Serpent. Broken Arrow is still in play, Mason said quietly. I need a sitrep. On snake activity, particularly any connection to BS-17, there was a long pause before a different voice came on the line. Older, authoritative. Mason, Jesus, we thought, hold on. Papers shuffled in the background. You need to get out of there, now. Snake isn't just some gang. They're his personal militia, Mason finished. I know. Lieutenant Victor Petrov. He survived BS-17, didn't he? With half his face burned off. He's been building his forces, picking up disgraced special forces, mercenaries. Word is, he's got a personal grudge against the man who burned his opium empire and killed his brother. Yeah. Mason watched the night shadows lengthen across his farm. I'm not running. Damn it, Mason. He's got at least 30 men. This isn't a mission. You don't have a team. Mason ended the call, his decision already made. In the distance, an owl called, a real one this time. But soon enough, that signal would mean something very different. War was coming to his little farm in Montana, and John Mason would be ready. Life on the farm maintained its peaceful rhythm, but now it carried an undercurrent of preparation. Mason kept Sarah's routine as normal as possible while weaving in elements of survival training disguised as games. She learned to move quietly through the wheat fields, to spot disturbances in the natural pattern of things, to react instantly to subtle signals. Remember when we played hide-and-seek in the dark last summer? Mason asked one evening as they walked the fence line. Let's make it more interesting. No flashlights this time, and you have to reach the barn without making a sound. Sarah's eyes lit up at the challenge. Can I use the trails behind the shrubs like you showed me? That's my girl. Mason smiled, his heart heavy with the knowledge that these weren't just games anymore. The farm had another regular visitor now, Bill Thompson, the retired Air Force supply officer who lived 3 miles down the road. To anyone watching, he was just a friendly neighbor helping with equipment maintenance, but Mason knew better. 20 years ago, Bill Thompson had been his team's logistics specialist, the man who could make anything from bullets to battleships appear in the middle of nowhere. Perimeters tight, Bill reported quietly one afternoon, pretending to check the tractor's engine. Got the equipment you requested cached in the old Fuller place. Thermal imaging shows they're still watching. Usually 2-man teams. Professional rotation schedule. Mason nodded, making a show of examining the fuel line. They're waiting for something. Probably reinforcements. Or they're studying your routine. Looking for patterns. Bill's weathered face showed concern. John, I know you don't want to hear this, but Sarah is safer here with me than anywhere else. Mason cut him off. I can protect her. Bill sighed. Like you protected Rachel. The wrench in Mason's hand creaked under sudden pressure. That was different. The cancer. I couldn't fight that enemy. No, but you're still carrying the guilt. Don't let it cloud your judgment now. Bill straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. By the way, Carol's making her famous apple pie tonight. Sarah's welcome to come over while we bore her with old man talk. Mason understood the real message. Carol Thompson had been a combat medic. Before becoming a small-town nurse, she'd started teaching Sarah basic first aid last week. The days fell into a new pattern. Sarah would spend afternoons with the Thompsons, learning skills disguised as crafts and games. Mason used the time to check his cached weapons, update security measures, and coordinate with his old team through carefully encrypted channels. In town, tension grew with each passing day. The rising snake gang had gone quiet after hitting the Peterson Farm, but everyone knew they were still out there. Mason noticed more pickup trucks carrying rifle racks, more doors being locked in broad daylight, more fearful glances at unfamiliar vehicles. Sarah's school principal called one afternoon, concerned about her new imaginary game of checking exits and counting students in her classroom. Mason explained it away as a phase, something she'd picked up from watching too many movies. But pride mixed with his worry. She was learning, adapting, preparing without even realizing it. At night, after Sarah was asleep, Mason would sit on the porch with a cold beer, watching the tree line through old habits that had never quite died. Sometimes he'd catch glimpses of his observers, a flash of moonlight on a scope, the brief glow of a cigarette quickly extinguished, boot prints in the morning dew that hadn't been there the night before. They were getting bolder, closer, testing his awareness, his responses. Mason made sure they saw exactly what they expected. A simple farmer, perhaps a bit more alert than most due to the recent troubles, but nothing that would raise suspicions. But beneath the peaceful facade, plans were being laid, weapons were being cleaned and positioned, escape routes were being prepared. The calm before the storm wouldn't last much longer, and when it broke, John Mason would remind the world why he had been Delta Force's most lethal operator. For now, though, he helped Sarah with her homework, fixed fence posts, and played along. With the illusion of normalcy, the wheat fields rippled in the Montana wind, keeping their secrets, and somewhere in those golden waves, shadows moved, watching, waiting, unaware that they were sealing their own fate with every passing day. They came at midnight during the new moon. 3 men, dressed in tactical gear, moving with military precision through Mason's wheat field. Their night vision goggles cut through the darkness, but they failed to spot the hair-thin tripwires Mason had strung between the stalks. The first sign that something was wrong came when their pointman's foot caught a wire. A series of small LED lights suddenly flared to life, temporarily blinding anyone wearing night vision. The man's curse was cut short by a whistling sound, followed by a dull thud. "Contact left," one of them shouted, just before a weighted net dropped from above, entangling him and his remaining companion. Mason emerged from the shadows like a ghost. He moved without sound, without hurry, every motion economical and precise. The first man was already unconscious, taken down by a rubber projectile fired from a compressed air launcher, non-lethal but effective. The two tangled in the net. "We're still struggling when Mason reached them. Amateur hour," he said quietly, removing their weapons with practiced ease. "Your Overwatch team on the ridge is already sleeping. The backup unit by the creek is currently enjoying some aerosolized sedative. And your communications—" He held up a small device that was jamming their frequencies. "Well, let's just say, no one's coming to help." One of the trapped men spat a curse. "You have no idea what's coming for you." Mason zip-tied their hands with casual efficiency. "Actually, I do. Tell Victor his old friend from Black Serpent says hello." He watched their eyes widen with recognition and fear. "That's right. Now you're going to deliver a message for me." By dawn, the would-be raiders had vanished, along with any evidence of the night's activities. Sarah came down for breakfast to find her father making pancakes, as if nothing had happened. But there was a new tension in the air, an electricity that made her skin prickle. "Dad?" she asked, watching him flip a perfectly golden pancake. "I heard noises last night." Mason set a plate in front of her, his movements controlled and precise. "Just some coyotes, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about." But Sarah was her father's daughter. She noticed the fresh tire tracks leading away from the farm, the slightly trampled wheat in the north field, the new scuffs on her father's boots. She remembered the games he'd taught her, about observing details and reading situations. "Did you catch the coyotes?" she asked carefully. Mason paused, studying his daughter's face. She was too smart, too observant, just like her mother had been. "Yes," he said finally, "and I sent them home with a warning." Sarah nodded, understanding more than a 12-year-old should. Will they come back? Probably, but with friends next time. Mason sat down across from her, his face serious. Remember what we practiced? About the owl call and the basement? Yes, and the hollow tree if I can't reach the basement. She cut her pancake into precise squares. Is it time for real now? Not just practice? Mason's heart ached at the maturity in her voice. Yes, sweetheart. It's time for real now. Later that morning, Mason found evidence that the gang had left him a reply to his message. Carved into the bark of an old oak tree at the edge of his property was a crude drawing of a snake wrapped around a burning farm. Below it, in Russian, were the words, "The fire rises again." He studied the carving without expression, his mind already calculating angles, resources, contingencies. The night's encounter had confirmed what he'd suspected. These were trained operators, but not top tier. Dangerous enough to terrorize civilians, but they'd never face someone like him. Someone who had spent decades in the shadows, perfecting the art of violence while they played at being soldiers. Yet something about their tactics bothered him. The probing attack had been too obvious, too amateurish for a group led by Viktor Petrov, almost as if Mason's eyes narrowed as realization hit. This hadn't been a real attack. It was a test, a calibration probe. They wanted to see how he would respond, what capabilities he would reveal. He had shown them skill and restraint, using non-lethal methods to subdue their men. Now they knew he was more than a simple farmer, but they didn't know everything. He still held advantages they couldn't suspect. A dozen miles away, in an abandoned lumber mill, Viktor Petrov received the report from his chastened men. His scarred, his face twisted into something that might have been a smile as he watched drone footage of Mason's farm. "So," he said in heavily accented English, "the dragon shows his claws at last. But this time, old friend, I am ready for your fire." Viktor Petrov stood before a detailed map of Mason's farm, his scarred face illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights. The abandoned lumber mill's office had been transformed into a tactical operations center, with surveillance feeds, drone imagery, and personnel dossiers covering every wall. At the center of it all was a faded photograph, a younger John Mason in Delta Force gear, standing amid the burning ruins of an opium processing facility. 3 years I've hunted you," Petrov murmured, his burned fingers tracing the route to Mason's farmhouse. 3 years since you destroyed everything I built, killed my brother, left me to burn." He turned to face the assembled men. 30 hardened veterans recruited from private military companies and dishonorably discharged special forces units. "Your test teams performed exactly as expected," he continued. Mason revealed enough, skill to confirm his identity, but not enough to expose his full capabilities. Classic Delta Force methodology. A cruel smile twisted his disfigured features. "But he's not in the sandbox anymore. Here he has attachments." The projector hummed to life, displaying high-resolution photos of Sarah at school, at the Thompson farm, working in the fields with her father. Some of the mercenaries shifted uncomfortably. They were soldiers, not child killers. Petrov noted their discomfort with contempt. "The girl will not be harmed. She is our key to breaking him." He switched to a thermal imaging display of the farm's layout. Mason's defensive preparations are sophisticated but predictable. Remote sensors, hidden cameras, prepared fallback positions. He's fighting the last war, expecting direct confrontation. A soldier raised his hand. Jenkins, former British SAS. "Sir, if we know his capabilities, why not just hit him with overwhelming force? We have the numbers." "Because, Mr. Jenkins, that's exactly what he wants." Petrov's voice carried the weight of bitter experience. Mason's specialty was turning superior numbers against his opponents. "No, we will do something he doesn't expect. We will make him choose between his daughter's safety and his desire for revenge." Back at the farm, Mason was making preparations of his own. The basement armory stood open for the first time in years, its contents laid out with military precision. Custom rifles, body armor, surveillance equipment, tools of his former trade, maintained in perfect condition despite their long dormancy. Bill Thompson surveyed the arsenal with a low whistle. "Just like old times, eh?" "This is different," Mason replied, checking the action on a suppressed MP5. "Back then, we were the hunters, and now we're the prey." Bill's attempt at humor fell flat. Mason's eyes were cold. "No, now we're the trap." They worked in silence, preparing equipment and reviewing contingency plans. Years of shared combat experience made words unnecessary. Each man knew his role, understood the stakes. "Carol's got the medical cache ready," Bill said finally. "Safe house is stocked. Sarah can be there in 20 minutes if things go south." Mason nodded, but his jaw was tight. "They'll be watching for that. Petrov knows my background, knows I'll have escape routes planned. He'll try to use Sarah to force my hand." "The girl's stronger than you think, John. Smart too, just like Rachel was." The mention of his late wife made Mason pause in his preparations. Rachel had understood the risks of marrying a Delta operator, had helped him maintain his cover story even after retirement. She would know what to do now. "I should have killed him in Afghanistan," Mason said quietly, "when I had the chance." Bill's response was interrupted by a subtle vibration from their phones, a perimeter alarm. They moved to the surveillance feeds, watching as a single figure approached the farm's main gate. Local law enforcement vehicle, single occupant, sheriff. "Hawkins," Mason identified the visitor. But something was off about the man's posture, his movements. The sheriff's cruiser stopped at the gate. Hawkins stepped out, his uniform pristine despite the dusty road. "Mason," he called out, "need to talk to you about those trespassers from last night." Mason studied the video feed, noting details that would be invisible to untrained eyes. The slight bulge of body armor under the uniform, the non-standard hold on his service weapon, the way he kept his left side angled away from the cameras. "He's been compromised," Mason concluded. "Petrov's sending us a message. He has reach inside. Local law enforcement." Bill's expression darkened. "Changes the game. We can't trust any official channels now." "No," Mason agreed, watching the sheriff's increasingly agitated calls for contact. "But it confirms what I suspected. Petrov's not just after revenge. He's building something here, something that requires political coverage." He reached for his phone, dialing a number that would route through 7 different countries before reaching its destination. "Time to call in some markers." The sheriff eventually left, but the message had been delivered. The lines were drawn now, the battle space defined. Petrov had shown he could reach into Mason's world, corrupt his local support network. But he had also revealed his own playbook: psychological warfare, leverage, gradual escalation. Mason closed the armory, each weapon returned to its place with practiced precision. Tomorrow, Sarah would go to school as usual. The farm's routine would continue unchanged. Let Petrov think his psychological games were working. But tonight, in the dark hours before dawn, John Mason would begin his own operation. Not as a defender, reacting to threats, but as the apex predator he had been trained to be. Petrov wanted to play games with leverage and fear. Fine, let's play. The secure satellite phone came to life at exactly 0300 hours. Mason sat in his darkened study, speaking in hushed tones as old ghosts answered his call. Each conversation was brief, coded, and ended with the same response. "We're coming. Delta." Force operators never truly retired, they just went dormant. Now, scattered across the country, his former team members were awakening to their brother's call. The snake had stirred up a hornet's nest. In the pre-dawn hours, Mason began transforming his farm into a killing ground. Innocent-looking irrigation. Pipes became improvised claymore housings. Solar-powered garden lights were repurposed as infrared markers. Every approach to the farmhouse was rigged with overlapping fields of fire, each defensive position supporting two others. Sarah found him in the barn as the sun rose, installing what looked like new security cameras. "Are more friends coming?" she asked, helping him hold a ladder steady. Mason paused in his work. She'd noticed the phone calls, of course. "Yes. Remember Uncle Jake? And Aunt Maria?" Sarah's eyes lit up. She'd been too young to remember them clearly, but the photos in there, a family album, showed her riding on Jake's shoulders, playing chess with Maria. "Your old team?" "That's right. They're coming to help us with the farm for a while." Mason descended the ladder, checking the camera's blind spots. "Things might get a little strange around here, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" "Always, Dad." She handed him another camera. "Is this because of the bad men, the ones who hurt Mr. Peterson?" Mason considered his words carefully. "There's a man who's angry with me about something that happened a long time ago. He's trying to hurt people to get to me. Because of what you did before when you were a soldier. Something like that." Mason secured the final camera. "But this time, we're going to stop him before he can hurt anyone else." By noon, the first of his old team had arrived. Jake Chen rolled up in a beaten-up farm truck, looking every bit the agricultural equipment supplier his cover suggested. The cargo bed was loaded with crates marked irrigation supplies, their contents far deadlier than mere pipes and pumps. Maria Kovac arrived next, her credentials as a visiting rural education specialist impeccable. The laptop she carried contained enough computing power to run battlefield operations, her satellite uplink disguised as standard teaching equipment. They gathered in the barn, away from prying eyes. Jake's easy smile disappeared as he studied the surveillance feeds. "Petrov's got at least 3 sniper nests set up on the ridgeline," he noted, marking positions on a tactical map. "Professional setups, probably ex-Spetsnaz." Maria's fingers danced across her keyboard. "I've intercepted some of their communications. They're using rotating frequencies, but the pattern is predictable. Sloppy." Her accent carried traces of her Croatian homeland. "They're waiting for something. A shipment, maybe. Weapons?" Mason asked, but Maria shook her head. "Not just weapons. Something bigger. I'm picking up references to the package and special cargo. Whatever it is, Petrov's putting everything on hold until it arrives." Mason absorbed this information, his mind racing through implications. He's not just out for revenge. This is about rebuilding his operation, using my territory as a staging ground. "Makes sense," Jake agreed. "Remote location, compromised local law enforcement, strategic position near the Canadian border. Perfect for smuggling, and I'm in his way." Mason's voice was cold. Again, Maria looked up from her computer. "John, this isn't like Black Serpent. You've got Sarah to think about now." "I am thinking about her." Mason's eyes hardened. "Every farm Petrov hits, every family he terrorizes, that's the world she'll inherit if we don't stop him here." The barn door opened, admitting Bill Thompson with another familiar face. Samuel "Doc" Wilson, their former combat medic. Doc's medical bag contained equipment that would make most trauma centers envious. "Perimeter's secure," Bill reported. "Doc set up a field station in the storm cellar. Carol's got Sarah for the afternoon, teaching her advanced first aid." Mason nodded, grateful again for the Thompsons' help in preparing his daughter for what might come. "Any word from Reaper?" "Your sniper's 2 days out," Maria answered. "Says he's bringing a wedding present." A ghost of a smile crossed Mason's face. Michael Reaper. O'Brien's idea of a wedding present would give most ATF agents nightmares. The team fell into familiar patterns, each member taking up their old roles as if the years apart had never happened. Jake and Bill began distributing and positioning equipment. Maria established secure communications and surveillance networks. Doc inventoried medical supplies while updating their combat first aid qualifications. But underneath the professional efficiency, a current of anger ran deep. These weren't just soldiers answering a colleague's call. They were family coming to defend one of their own. Petro had no idea what he'd awakened. As evening approached, Mason found Sarah sitting on the porch, watching his old team at work. "They move like you do," she observed. "Quiet, but ready." Mason sat beside her. "They taught me a lot of what I know, and now they're here to help keep you safe." Sarah leaned against him. "Are you going to hurt the bad men?" "Only if they force us to," Mason answered carefully. "Sometimes showing people you can hurt them is enough to make them go away." But in his heart, Mason knew it wouldn't be that simple. Petro wasn't the type to back down from a show of force. This would end in blood. The only question was, whose? As darkness fell over the farm, Mason's team continued their preparations. Tomorrow, they would begin actively hunting Petrov's observers. The day after, they would start dismantling his local support network. And when the mysterious shipment arrived, well, that's when the real awakening would begin. The farm's kitchen had become an impromptu command center, laptops and surveillance equipment sharing space with Sarah's breakfast cereal. Maria's fingers flew across 3 keyboards simultaneously, following digital breadcrumbs through the dark. A web. Rachel's oncologist, Dr. Werner, disappeared 6 months ago, she reported, eyes never leaving the screens. His replacement came with perfect credentials. Too perfect. Her expression darkened. "The kind we used to create for deep cover operations." Mason leaned against the counter, his coffee growing cold and forgotten. "Petrov played a long game. 3 years of planning, just to make sure I suffered before he killed me." "The cancer diagnosis was real," Doc Wilson added, reviewing medical files. "But the treatment protocol, Jesus, John. They accelerated it, made it worse, used experimental drugs that were known to be ineffective." The mug in Mason's hand shattered. Coffee and ceramic shards scattering across the floor. Sarah, who had been quietly doing her homework at the far end of the table, looked up at the sound. "Dad, are you okay?" Mason forced his features to soften. "Just clumsy, sweetheart. Why don't you go help Mrs. Thompson with the garden for a while?" Once Sarah was safely out of earshot, Mason turned to his team. "I want everything. Every person Petrov has bought, every operation he's running, every shell company and front organization. Turn his network inside out." Jake nodded, already making calls on a secure line. "I've got contacts in the financial intelligence unit. They've been tracking some weird money movements in the region, shell companies buying up land, industrial equipment being shipped to dummy corporations." "He's building infrastructure," Bill Thompson added. "The lumber mill, the airstrip, these aren't just hideouts, they're facilities." Maria's computer chimed with an incoming alert. "Speaking of facilities, our drone just picked up new activity. At the mill. Large trucks arriving, heavy security presence." She pulled up thermal imaging. "Whatever that special cargo is, I think it's arriving early." Mason studied the footage. The trucks were military surplus, but the security detail was professional. Overlapping fields of fire, proper distance maintenance, counter-surveillance procedures. These aren't local thugs. He's bringing in his real operators now. "Good." Jake checked his weapon. "I was getting bored with the B team." The sound of approaching vehicles caught their attention. Through the kitchen window, they watched 3 SUVs pull up to the farm's gate. Sheriff Hawkins stepped out of the lead vehicle, accompanied by men in FBI windbreakers. "Right on schedule," Maria smirked. "Petrov's pet law enforcement, right when we're getting close to something interesting." Mason moved to the front porch, projecting the image of a concerned citizen. "Something wrong, Sheriff?" Hawkins tried to hide his nervousness behind official bluster. "Got reports of suspicious activity, Mason. FBI's here to ask some questions about recent break-ins. The FBI agents spread out with tactical precision, except they were holding their weapons wrong, their stances betraying non-federal training. Mason counted 4 concealed snipers in the tree line, waiting for him to be distracted. "Of course, happy to help," Mason replied amiably. "Let me just secure my dog first. Don't want him getting excited with all these strangers around." The code phrase activated their pre-planned response. Inside the house, Maria's fingers danced. Across her keyboard, sending encrypted signals. Suddenly, every cell phone and radio in the fake FBI team went dead. Thermal cameras caught their startled reactions, their hands instinctively moving to backup communications that no longer worked. "Strange," Mason commented as the men tried to hide their growing unease. "Seems like the cell service out here is getting worse. Must be all the solar flares they talked about on the news." The implied message was clear. "We can shut down your tech at will. We know you're not real FBI. We're letting you walk away this time. Sheriff Hawkins got the message. Might have to reschedule this visit. Need to call in some technical support first." As the vehicles retreated, Jake gave a low whistle. "They'll tell Petrov we're better equipped than expected." Good. Mason watched them leave through his rifle scope. Let him know he's not dealing with an old farmer. Time to change the game. The team spent the rest of the day expanding their surveillance network. Micro-drones disguised as insects mapped the lumber mill's defenses. Satellite uplinks tracked vehicle movements across 5 states. Financial algorithms followed money. Trails through dozens of banks. Petrov's network was vast, but it was built on secrecy and shadows. Now that they knew where to look, light was pouring in through every crack. Sarah returned from the Thompsons' garden with dirty hands and fresh vegetables. She found her father's team gathered around the kitchen table, planning something over maps and computers. "Did you catch more bad guys today?" she asked, washing. Her hands at the sink. Mason shared a look with his team. She was too perceptive to keep completely in the dark. "We're working on it. Found out some important things about why they're here." Sarah dried her hands carefully. "Because of Mom. I heard you talking earlier." The room went silent. Mason felt his heart constrict. "Sarah..." "It's okay, Dad," she said with a maturity that broke his heart. "Mom would want you to stop them from hurting other people's families, too." Maria wiped tears from her eyes. Jake stared at his boots. Even Doc seemed to be fighting emotion. "Yes," Mason finally managed. "That's exactly what we're going to do." As night fell over the farm, the team finalized their plans. Tomorrow they would begin dismantling Petrov's operation piece by piece. His network had taken 3 years to build. They would destroy it in 3 days, but first they had to discover what was in that special cargo, because whatever it was, it had Petrov confident enough to move up his timeline. And anything that made a man like Viktor Petrov feel confident was dangerous indeed. Dawn painted the sky in shades of blood when Petrov's forces made their first serious push. This wasn't another probe or test. This was a full tactical assault. 3 teams of 4, approaching from different vectors, with sniper support from the ridgeline. Mason watched them through thermal imaging, his voice calm in the radio. "Maria, status on their communications?" "Encrypted, military grade. But their backup channels are vulnerable." "Want me to kill their comms?" "Not yet. Let's see what they're carrying first." The attacking force moved with professional precision, using the wheat fields as cover. Their gear was top-tier, latest generation night vision, body armor suppressed. Weapons that would cost a year's farming income each. "These aren't local talent," Jake observed from his position in the barn's sniper nest. "Former special forces, maybe Blackwater or Wagner Group. Way they move reminds me of those Chechen contractors we faced in 19. Mason allowed himself a grim smile. Finally, Petrov was sending his real operators. "Reaper, you in position." "Michael." "Reaper." O'Brien's voice crackled through the secure channel. He'd arrived in the night, setting up a hidden position a mile out. 5 targets acquired. Permission to ruin their day? Negative. Hold for synchronized response. Mason switched channels. Doc, how's our guest? Secured in the storm cellar with Carol. Sarah's being very brave. That was an understatement. When they'd evacuated her an hour ago, Sarah had hugged him fiercely and whispered, "Make them regret hurting Mom." His daughter's strength both inspired and terrified him. The attacking force reached their first objective line, pausing to coordinate their final approach. Mason let them think they were undetected, watching as they prepared their breach equipment. "Time to educate them," he said quietly. "Maria, kill their comms. Jake, light up the field." The effect was immediate and devastating. Every radio channel went dead simultaneously. Powerful LED arrays concealed in the irrigation equipment flared to life, ruining their night vision advantage. Before they could recover, focused sonic pulses from hidden speakers disoriented their inner ears. Then Mason's team opened fire. The battle was brief but intense. Rubber bullets and beanbag rounds dropped half the attackers before they could find cover. Those who made it to defensive positions found themselves caught in pre-sighted kill zones, unable to advance or retreat without exposing themselves. "Remember," Mason's voice was ice-cold in the radio, "we want prisoners for questioning, but if they use lethal force—" He didn't need to finish the thought. His team knew the rules of engagement. The snipers on the ridge tried to provide support, but Reaper had been waiting for them. The crack of his rifle echoed across the valley as he systematically destroyed their weapons with precise shots. "Showing. Off again, Michael," Maria teased over the comm. "You know me, darling. Always did love making things go boom." Within 15 minutes it was over. 7 captured, 4 wounded, the rest in retreat. No fatalities, exactly as Mason had planned. They needed intelligence more than body counts. Jake and Bill secured the prisoners while Doc treated the wounded. Mason approached the leader, a hard-faced man with Spetsnaz tattoos visible under his tactical gear. "Your employer is getting sloppy," Mason observed, crouching down beside him. 3 years ago, he would never have rushed an operation like this. The man spat blood from a split lip. "He said you'd try to play mind games. Said you'd act superior, try to prove you're still the better tactician." "Not playing games. Just having a professional discussion." Mason held up a satellite phone. "In fact, why don't we call Victor right now? Let him know how his elite team performed." The man's eyes widened slightly, the first sign of real fear. "He'll kill us if we fail." "Probably, unless you help us understand what's so important about that shipment he's rushing to protect." Before the man could respond, Maria's voice crackled urgently through the radio. "John, we've got a problem. Major vehicle movement at the lumber mill. They're evacuating something. Looks like they're cutting their losses." Mason stood, his expression hardening. No, he's accelerating again. The attack wasn't meant to succeed. It was a diversion. He keyed his radio. "All units switch to Operation Thunderbolt protocols. They're moving their primary asset." As his team scrambled to respond, Mason studied the northern horizon. Something had spooked Petrov, made him abandon his careful timeline. The question was, what? The answer came an hour later, when Maria intercepted an encrypted transmission from the lumber mill. The message was brief but revelatory. "Package compromised. Radiation signature detected. Initiate Protocol 0. Mason's blood ran cold. Suddenly, the scale of Petrov's operation made terrible sense. This wasn't just about drugs or smuggling or even revenge. Viktor Petrov was building something much worse, and he was using Mason's farm as ground zero. Maria's fingers flew across her keyboard as satellite data streamed across multiple screens. "The radiation signature is consistent with weapons-grade material, but it's not just one source. I'm picking up multiple hits across the region." Mason studied the tactical display, his mind racing through implications. He's been using the farm raids as cover, setting up a network of storage sites. Each attack wasn't just about terrorizing locals, it was about establishing secure locations. Jesus Christ, Jake breathed, looking at the data. He's building a dirty bomb, multiple dirty bombs. No, Mason's voice was grim. He's building a distribution network. The bombs are just the product. He's creating an entire underground pipeline for radiological weapons. The captured Spetsnaz operative laughed darkly from his restraints. Finally figured it out, didn't you? Why the boss spent 3 years setting this up? America's so focused on its southern border, it never watches its northern back door. Mason turned to the prisoner, his eyes cold. Where's the main storage facility? You think I'll tell you? I'm dead anyway. True, Mason approached slowly, but how you die, quick or slow, comfortable or in agony, that's up to you. The man's bravado wavered as Mason leaned close and whispered something in Russian. Whatever he said drained all color from the operative's face. The old mine, he stammered, 10 miles north of the lumber mill, but you'll never reach it, not with what's coming. Maria's computer chimed an alert. Multiple vehicles approaching from the east. Heavy trucks, military grade, and... She paused, rechecking the data. John, they've got Sarah's teacher with them. Mason's head snapped up. Miss Roberts, Sarah's favorite teacher, the one who'd been giving her extra help with science projects. Another of Petrov's long-term plants. They're making their play for Sarah, he realized, using someone she trusts to get close. The team moved with practiced efficiency, but this time there was an edge of desperate fury to their actions. This wasn't just about stopping criminals anymore. These people had targeted a child, had poisoned Rachel's treatment, had spent years weaving a web around Mason's family. Got a visual on the convoy, Reaper reported from his sniper position. 4 armored vehicles, at least 20 personnel. Miss Roberts is in the second vehicle, looks unharmed but moving under duress. Mason keyed his radio. Doc, status on Sarah? Safe in the panic room with Carol. But John, she's asking questions. Smart ones. She's figured out Miss Roberts must be involved somehow. Of course she had. Sarah had her mother's mind, always connecting dots others missed. Mason felt a surge of pride mixed with heartache. Tell her... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Tell her Miss Roberts made some bad choices, but we're going to help her make better ones. The convoy stopped just outside the farm's main entrance. Miss Roberts stepped out, wearing her usual cheerful smile. But Mason could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her hands. Mr. Mason, she called out. Sarah left her science project at school. I thought I'd drop it off, maybe talk about her progress. Mason watched through his scope as armed men took up positions. Behind the vehicles, their weapons trained on the farmhouse. Amateur theatrics, the real threat would be coming from another direction. He was proven right when Maria's sensors detected movement underground. They were using the old prohibition tunnels, trying to breach the farm from below, while the convoy provided a distraction. Like I said, the captured operative smirked, you'll never reach the mine, not while you're busy defending your precious daughter. Mason turned to his prisoner, something dark and terrible crossing his face. You think I didn't know about the tunnels, about Miss Roberts, about every move Petrov planned? He activated his radio. Maria, show them our surprise. Suddenly, the tunnel entrances erupted in a series of controlled explosions, sealing them permanently. The convoy's radio channels exploded with panic as their underground teams went silent. 3 years, Mason continued conversationally. That's how long Petrov spent planning this operation, but he forgot something important. He moved to the window, raising a detonator. This was my wife's dream farm, and Rachel was always very thorough about studying property histories. Miss Roberts's eyes widened in realization just before the ground beneath the convoy turned to liquid. The vehicles sank into what appeared to be a suddenly revealed sinkhole, but was actually an elaborate trap using the farm's irrigation system. "We mapped every tunnel," Mason explained to his shocked prisoner, "every cave, every underground route within 10 miles, and we filled them with surprises. Petrov thought he was being clever, using them for his smuggling network. All he did was put his men exactly where we wanted them." The convoy's personnel scrambled from their sinking vehicles, only to find themselves caught in overlapping fields of fire. Within minutes, they were disarmed and secured. Miss Roberts sat in the mud, her facade of cheerful teacher completely gone. "He'll kill me for failing." "No," Mason helped her up. "He won't get the chance, because you're going to help us stop him, for Sarah's sake, if nothing else." The woman's shoulders slumped in defeat. "The mine, it's not just a storage facility. It's a processing center. He's been buying raw materials from old Soviet stockpiles, refining them here. The network spans 3 states already, and tomorrow—" She swallowed hard. "Tomorrow the first shipment goes live." Mason nodded to Maria, who was already coordinating with their surveillance assets. The pieces were finally coming together. The full scope of Petrov's operation laid bare, but as they prepared to move against the mine, a new message arrived on their secure channel. The text was brief but chilling. "Did you really think I'd keep all my eggs in one basket, old friend? Check your daughter's latest blood work, clock's ticking." Doc Wilson's hands shook as he read the blood test results. Low-dose polonium, the kind that takes months to show symptoms. They've been exposing her through her school water bottle, the one Miss Roberts gave her for the science. Fair. Mason stood absolutely still, the kind of stillness that combat veterans recognized as the deadliest state a man could enter. When he spoke, his voice carried the chill of a Siberian winter. "Can you treat it?" "Yes, if we start now. I've got chelation therapy equipment in my kit. Carol's already beginning the first round." Doc met his friend's eyes. "She'll be okay, John, but we've got a 48-hour window before the damage becomes permanent." The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. The rest of the team watched their former commander carefully, recognizing the signs of Delta Force's most lethal operator emerging from his farmer's disguise. "Maria, what's the status on the mine?" She consulted her screens. "Heavy security. Multiple layers. They're moving something big out through the north entrance. Thermal imaging shows at least 40 armed personnel." "And the other storage sites?" "Starting to go dark. They're either abandoning them or fortifying them." "Hard to tell which," Mason nodded once. "Jake, get Reaper on the line. Tell him to start eliminating their observation posts. I want them blind in the next hour." "What about the local authorities?" Bill asked. "Even the corrupt ones might help. If they knew about the radiation threat. No time and too risky. Petrov's got too many people bought." Mason turned to Miss Roberts, who sat pale and shaking under Maria's guard. "Where's Victor now?" "The mine. He always oversees major shipments personally." A predatory smile crossed Mason's face. "Good." The next hour was a blur of precise, coordinated activity. The team moved with the efficiency of people who had spent years fighting together, each person anticipating the other's needs without discussion. Jake and Reaper systematically eliminated Petrov's surveillance network. One by one, the observation posts went silent. No casualties. They used targeted EMP devices to fry equipment and sonic weapons to incapacitate personnel. But the message was clear. The hunters were now the hunted. Maria's cyber assault was equally devastating. Bank accounts frozen, communication networks compromised, supply lines disrupted. Every digital thread Petrov had woven over 3 years was unraveled in 60 minutes. "Multiple vehicles leaving the mining complex," she reported. "They're spooked, breaking into smaller groups, trying to scatter their assets. Let them run." Mason checked his weapons. "Scared people make mistakes." Bill approached with a tablet showing satellite imagery. Think I found their evacuation protocol. Small convoys, each with a decoy vehicle carrying a radiation signature. Classic shell game. How many heading north? 3 groups of 4 vehicles. Each. Mason's eyes narrowed. And south? 2 groups. No, wait. Bill adjusted the image. Only 1 group south, just 2 vehicles. That's him. Mason slung his rifle. Petrov's too arrogant to run north with the cargo. He'll try to circle around, come at us from an unexpected direction. The team geared up, each member checking weapons and equipment with practiced precision, but this time Mason stopped them. "This isn't like our other operations," he said quietly. "What Petrov's done, to Sarah, to Rachel, to all the families in this region, there's no coming back from that." They understood his meaning. For the first time since arriving at the farm, lethal force was authorized. Doc emerged from the basement medical room. "Sarah's responding well to the treatment. She wanted you to have this." He handed Mason a small paper crane. Sarah had been practicing origami during her treatments. A child's message of hope in the midst of war. Mason carefully tucked the crane into his chest pocket. When he looked up, his eyes held the focus of a man who had transcended normal human limitations of rage and entered a state of pure, deadly purpose. "We move in 3 teams, he outlined the plan. "Maria and Bill coordinate from here, maintain surveillance and communications. Jake and Reaper continue eliminating their infrastructure. Doc, you and Carol focus on Sarah." "And you?" Jake asked, though they all knew the answer. "I'm going hunting." Mason checked his watch. "Petrov wants to make this personal. Fine. Let's give him what he wants." The team moved out under the cover of approaching darkness. Above them, storm clouds gathered, as if nature itself was responding to the violence to come. In the medical room, Sarah slept peacefully, watched over by Carol. The poison in her blood was being drawn out, her young body fighting back against Petrov's cruelty. She would survive, would grow stronger. But first, her father had to remind the world why Delta Force operators were considered the deadliest hunters in human history. The game was changing. Petrov had spent 3 years building his network, months poisoning Rachel, weeks targeting Sarah. He thought time was on his side. He was wrong. Mason had learned patience as a farmer, but he hadn't forgotten how to kill. And now, with his daughter's life in the balance, he would show Petrov the difference between a soldier playing at being a farmer and a predator who had merely been lying dormant. The first sign that something was wrong came from Maria's surveillance network. Screens flickered, data streams stuttered, and encrypted channels began dropping one by one. "We're being hacked," she announced, fingers racing across keyboards. "Someone's inside our secure network, someone who knows our protocols." Mason felt the first cold tendril of dread. Only a handful of people had access to their security architecture, and all of them were. His radio crackled. "John." "Sheriff." Hawkins's voice carried an unfamiliar edge. "I've got an FBI tactical team surrounding your property. Real ones this time. Stand down or we come in hard." Through the window, Mason watched black SUVs emerge from the tree line, their lights cutting through the gathering dusk. Men in tactical gear took up positions, their movements showing genuine federal training. "Maria." "Confirmed FBI signatures. These are the real deal." She looked up, face pale. "John." "The hack. It's coming from inside the house." The implications hit like a physical blow. Someone on his team, someone he trusted, had been compromised. But who? The answer came in the form of approaching footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, coming from the direction of Sarah's medical room. Mason turned, weapon raised, to find Bill Thompson standing in the doorway. His old friend's face was a mask of regret and determination. "Sorry, John. Petrov got to Carol 6 months ago. threatened our grandchildren. Bill's hand rested on his holstered sidearm. We couldn't let him hurt them. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound Mason had ever received. Bill and Carol Thompson, his neighbors, his friends, the people he'd trusted with his daughter's safety. "Where's Sarah?" Mason's voice was deadly quiet. "Safe. For now. Carol's taking her to Petrov. You've got 1 hour to surrender yourself. And the evidence you've gathered, or..." Bill swallowed hard. "Or they start her next round of polonium treatments." Jake moved to flank, but Mason waved him off. This wasn't a tactical situation anymore. This was the collapse of trust, the poisoning of friendship. "How long?" Mason asked. "How long have you been feeding him information?" "Since Rachel died. He approached us at the funeral, showed us pictures of our grandchildren at school, at soccer practice, said we could either help him destroy you piece by piece or watch our family suffer." Mason's mind raced through memories, recontextualizing 3 years of interactions. The Thompsons' help with Sarah, their constant presence, their intimate knowledge of his routines and defenses. They hadn't just been neighbors, they'd been Petrov's eyes and ears. "The FBI," Maria worked it out, "you gave them everything. Our operations, our evidence about the radiation." Bill nodded. "Petrov has people in the bureau. They'll bury the evidence, label you as a domestic terrorist. Your old team will be charged with conspiracy." Outside, the FBI tactical teams were moving closer. Inside, the house's systems continued to fail as Bill's hidden programs corrupted their security. "1 hour, John," Bill repeated. "For Sarah's sake, don't make this harder than it has to be." Mason's response was a blur of motion. Before Bill could reach his weapon, he found himself disarmed and pinned against the wall, Mason's forearm against his throat. "You helped them poison my wife." Mason's voice was terrifyingly calm. "You helped them target my daughter. Give me one reason why I shouldn't end you right now." "Because I also slipped Sarah the first antidote," Bill gasped. "Been giving her microdoses, slowing the poison's progress. Why do you think she's responding so well to the treatment? Carol and I, we tried to protect her, within the limits of what Petrov would allow." Mason studied his old friend's eyes, seeing the truth there along with shame and desperate fear. Slowly he released his grip. "Maria, shut down everything. Burn the servers, wipe the drives. Jake, get Doc, and prepare for mobile operations." Mason turned back to Bill. "You're going to make a call to Carol. Tell her there's been a change of plans." "John, you can't possibly think—" "You're going to help us get my daughter back." Mason's tone left no room for argument. "And then you're going to help us destroy Petrov's entire operation, because if anything happens to Sarah..." He left the threat unfinished. Bill slumped in defeat. He's got too many pieces in play, the FBI, the evidence, the radiation threats. "No." Mason's eyes hardened. "He's got exactly what he wanted. Me, with my back against the wall and nothing left to lose." A dangerous smile crossed his face. "Your grandchildren will be safe, Sarah will be safe, and Petrov's about to learn why smart enemies never push a Delta operator to his absolute limits." As if to punctuate his words, the first explosion lit up the night sky. Reaper had begun systematically destroying Petrov's network, starting with the compromised evidence. The hunt wasn't over. It was just moving to a new phase, and this time there would be no mercy. The farm erupted into chaos as Petrov's forces launched their full assault. FBI teams in the front, compromised local law enforcement on the flanks, and Petrov's own mercenaries pushing through the wheat fields, all converging on the farmhouse. In a carefully coordinated attack, they expected to find Mason's team scrambling to defend their position. Instead, they found a ghost town rigged to explode. "Charges set," Jake reported through the secure channel, their last functioning. "Communication line, ready on your mark." Mason took one final look at the home he'd built with Rachel, where he'd raised Sarah, where he'd tried to find peace after years of war. In his mind, he could still see Rachel tending her garden, Sarah playing on the porch swing, the simple life they'd carved out here. "Burn it," he ordered quietly. The first explosion took out the barn, sending columns of flame into the night sky. The second collapsed the front of the house, creating a fatal funnel that caught the FBI assault team in a crossfire of debris. The third detonated the underground armory, sending a shockwave through the earth that knocked the approaching forces off their feet. But these were just the obvious explosions. The real devastation came from the hidden charges. Irrigation pipes burst, spraying attackers with incapacitating chemicals. Buried fuel lines ignited, creating walls of fire that divided the enemy forces. Power transformers overloaded, plunging sectors of the battlefield into strategic darkness. Through his night vision goggles, Mason watched the chaos unfold from his fallback position. Maria. Status. All data scrubbed. Backups secured. Ghost. Protocols activated. As far as any system is concerned, we never existed. She paused. They're trying to access the basement medical room. Let them. Mason's voice was ice. Doc cleaned it out. All they'll find is evidence of what they did to Sarah. Let's see how the FBI explains finding polonium traces in a child's water bottle. The attacking forces regrouped, adopting a more cautious approach after their initial losses. They began a methodical sweep of the property, unaware that they were playing directly into Mason's strategy. "Reaper, you're clear to engage." From his hidden position a mile away, O'Brien began his work. One by one, the leaders of each assault team found their weapons destroyed by precision shots. No casualties, just the systematic elimination of their tactical advantages. "Command vehicle is pulling back," Jake reported. "They're calling for air support." Mason checked his watch. Perfect timing. The helicopter appeared on schedule, its searchlight sweeping the burning farm. But as it moved to provide air coverage, something strange happened. Its electronics began to fail, its radio went dead, and its navigation systems gave conflicting readings. "Maria's little gift," Jake grinned. "Amazing what you can do with targeted electromagnetic pulses these days." The helicopter was forced to retreat, leaving the ground forces without air support. In the confusion, Mason's team executed their exit strategy. They moved like shadows through their own pre-planned routes, using the chaos and fire as cover. Each member had a specific destination, a role to play in what would come next. "Remember," Mason's voice crackled through their earpieces one last time. 12 hours to regroup at Site Bravo. Watch for Carol's signal. She'll try to contact us once she has Sarah secure." "You sure about trusting them?" Jake asked. "The Thompsons burned us once." They didn't have a choice before. Now they do. Mason's tone was final. "Plus, Bill knows what happens if they betray us again." The image of Mason's quiet conversation with Bill Thompson hung in their minds. Whatever had been said had left the man shaking, but grimly determined to make amends. As they melted away into the darkness, the farm continued to burn. Local fire departments would respond, but they'd find nothing worth saving. Just ashes, evidence of radiation, and enough proof of criminal conspiracy to keep federal investigators busy for months. Petro would be watching too, probably congratulating himself on forcing Mason from his stronghold, but he'd learn soon enough the farm hadn't been Mason's stronghold. It had been his first trap. From the ridgeline, Mason took one last look at the inferno that had been his home. In the distance, he could see more vehicles approaching, reinforcements arriving too late to matter. "Goodbye, Rachel," he whispered to the flames. "I'll make this right, for you and Sarah both." Then He disappeared into the night, leaving behind a burning message for Viktor Petrov. You wanted a war? Welcome to hell. Site Bravo turned out to be an abandoned Cold War-era bunker buried deep in the Montana wilderness. As Mason's team regrouped in its concrete depths, Maria's computers came back online one by one, rebuilding their intelligence network from encrypted backups. Carol made contact, she announced, 12 hours after the farm burned. Used our emergency channel. Sarah's being held at the mine complex, heavily guarded but unharmed. They're continuing the chelation therapy. Mason studied the thermal images of the mine complex displayed on the main screen. Petrov's consolidated everything there, all his forces, all his material. Smart move, Jake observed, cleaning his rifle nearby. Defensible position, multiple escape routes, good sight lines. Plus, the radiation from his weapons program masks any other signatures they want to hide. Not smart, Mason's eyes never left the display. Desperate, he's worried about something bigger than us. Maria's fingers danced across her keyboard. He should be. I finally cracked their internal communications. That special cargo everyone's been talking about, it's not just weapons-grade material. She pulled up a series of decoded messages. They've got a working prototype. Some kind of next-generation dirty bomb using polonium and other radioactive elements. They're calling it Project Widow. The name hit Mason like a physical blow. Widow, like what he'd become when Rachel died, like what Sarah would have become if the poison had worked faster. That's why they needed the farm, he realized. Not just for its location, but for testing. They've been using the whole region as a trial run, seeing how effectively they could distribute radioactive material without detection. There's more. Maria's voice was grim. According to this, they're planning to demonstrate the weapon's effectiveness to potential buyers. Something about proving it can contaminate an entire water table with minimal trace evidence. When? Tomorrow night, using the reservoir that supplies drinking water to 3 counties. The bunker fell silent as the implications sank in. Thousands of people would be exposed, just like Rachel had been, just like Sarah. Time to call in the feds, Jake suggested. Mason shook his head. Petrov's got too many people bought. We alert the authorities. He'll know we're coming. Sarah dies, and he escapes with the weapon. Then we do this the old way. Reaper's voice came from the shadows, where he'd been silently maintaining his equipment. Quick, quiet, and very, very permanent. First, we need a way in. Mason turned to Bill Thompson, who sat apart from the others, still under guard. That's where you come in. Bill straightened. The main shaft has a blind spot in its security coverage. Maintenance tunnel that doesn't show up on any official plans. Carol and I used it to check on the operation when Petrov was paranoid about leaks. Why should we trust your intel? Jake demanded. Because I'm done watching children die, Bill's voice cracked. Because what they did to Rachel, what they're doing to Sarah, there has to be a line, even for someone as compromised as me. Mason studied his former friend's face, seeing genuine remorse there. Good enough. Maria, what assets do we have left? She consulted her inventory. 4 TAC-50 sniper rifles with match-grade ammunition, 6 MP5SDs with subsonic rounds, enough C4 to bring down the mountain, plus all our specialty equipment, thermal, night vision, communications gear. And our ace in the hole? Mason asked. Maria smiled grimly. Ready to deploy. They'll never see it coming. Good. Mason activated the main tactical display, showing a 3-dimensional model of the mine complex. Here's how we play this. The next hours were a blur of precise preparation. Weapons were cleaned and checked, intelligence was analyzed and updated, entry and exit routes were memorized. Doc prepared medical supplies, knowing Sarah might need immediate treatment. Jake and Reaper synchronized their sniper scopes, establishing overlapping fields of fire. Maria programmed their ace in the hole, the nature of which she kept secret from even the team. Throughout it all, Mason remained focused, almost preternaturally calm. But those who knew him best saw the signs of controlled fury in his eyes, in the precision of his movements, in the cold calculation of his planning. "We'll have a 15-minute window," he outlined finally. "Any longer, and they'll be able to respond with overwhelming force. We go in fast, hit them hard, and get Sarah out before they can react." "And the weapon?" Bill asked. "We destroy it, along with anyone who knows how to make another one." Mason's voice was matter-of-fact, but his meaning was clear. This wasn't just a rescue mission. It was an elimination order. As the team made their final preparations, Mason found a quiet corner and took out Sarah's paper crane. The delicate origami had survived the farm's destruction, protected in his chest pocket. "Hang on, sweetheart," he whispered. "Dad's coming." Outside the bunker, storm clouds gathered over the Montana mountains. Thunder rolled in the distance, as if nature itself was preparing for war. In 12 hours, Mason's team would unleash hell on Viktor Petrov's operation. But first, they had to solve one final puzzle. How do you assault a fortified position, rescue a hostage, and prevent a weapon of mass destruction from being deployed, all while racing against a clock that's counting down to both your daughters? Death and the poisoning of an entire region's water supply? Mason smiled grimly in the darkness. Good thing impossible missions had always been Delta Force's specialty. Midnight at the bunker. The team made their final preparations in silence, each member lost in their own pre-mission rituals. The weight of what was to come hung heavy in the recycled air. Mason sat at the planning table, methodically checking his weapons one last time. His custom M4, modified for silent operation, the MP5SD that had seen him through 100 close-quarter battles, the razor-sharp combat knife that had been a gift from Rachel. She'd had it engraved with their wedding date, understanding, even then, what kind of man she was marrying. Maria approached, her laptop casting a blue glow on her face. Latest satellite pass shows increased activity at the mine. They're moving the weapon components to the central chamber. Starting final. Assembly, Mason nodded. Right on schedule. There's something else. She hesitated. I intercepted a call from Carol. Petrov's got Sarah in his command center. He's telling her stories about you, about Operation Black Serpent, about what really happened to her mother. Mason's hands stilled on his weapon. Is she okay? Carol. Says she's scared but holding it together. She told Petrov that her daddy's going to make him regret being mean. A ghost of a smile crossed Maria's face. Kid's got spirit, just like her mother. Mason resumed his weapon check, but his movements had gained a deadly precision. Time to brief the team. They gathered around the tactical display. Mason's old unit plus Bill Thompson, whose knowledge of the mine's layout had proven invaluable. The 3D hologram showed their target in perfect detail, each entrance and defensive position clearly. Marked. We move in 4 teams, Mason began. Reaper and Jake provide overwatch from these ridges. You'll have clear shots at their external security and any QRF they try to deploy. The 2 snipers nodded. They'd been positioning their hide sites for hours, calculating wind patterns and escape routes. Maria runs technical operations from here. Communications, surveillance, and our insurance policy. He turned to their computer expert. The moment we breach, you light them up. I want every system they have going haywire. Already written the virus, she patted her laptop. They'll think the ghost of Silicon Valley is haunting them. Doc, you're with Bill. Once we confirm Sarah's location, you 2 extract her through the maintenance tunnel, get her to the backup medical facility, and start treatment immediately. The medic checked his enhanced trauma kit. What about the radiation exposure from the weapon? We'll all be wearing these. Mason held up what looked like standard tactical gear, but contained cutting-edge radiation shielding. Courtesy of some friends who owe me favors at DARPA. And you, Jake asked, though they all knew the answer. I'm going to have a conversation with Viktor Petrov about family matters. Mason's voice could have frozen hell. Primary objectives are Sarah's extraction and the weapon's destruction, but Petrov doesn't leave that mountain alive. He turned to Bill. Last chance to back out. Once we start, there's no turning back. The older man squared his shoulders. I helped them hurt your family, John. Let me help make it right. Mason studied him for a moment, then nodded. Gear up. We move in 30. As the team made their final preparations, Mason retreated to a quiet corner. From his pocket, he took out 2 photos. The first showed Rachel on their wedding day, radiant and full of life. The second was Sarah's most recent school picture, her smile so much like her mother's. Maria found him there a few minutes later. John, there's something you need to know about the weapon. He looked up, seeing real fear in her eyes for the first time since the mission began. I finished analyzing the technical specs. It's not just a dirty bomb. They've engineered it to target specific genetic markers. Once released into the water supply, it would lie dormant until activated by a second chemical trigger. Like how they escalated Rachel's cancer treatment, Mason understood. They're weaponizing the same technique they used to kill her. Yes, but here's the thing. The genetic targeting, it's based on Sarah's DNA profile. They've been planning this for years, using your family as a test case. The temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. How many potential targets? Based on the genetic markers, about 30% of the local population. Thousands of children would die, the same way they tried to kill Sarah. Mason carefully put the photos away. When he looked up, his eyes had changed. Gone was any trace of the farmer, the father, the man who had tried to leave violence behind. In their place was something ancient and terrible, the apex predator that lived in some men's souls, the killer that civilization tried to chain, but never quite could. Signal the team, he said quietly. We're moving now. Outside, the storm finally broke. Lightning split the sky as Mason's team emerged from the bunker. Thunder rolled across the mountains like artillery fire. In the distance, the lights of Petrov's mining complex shone through the rain. Somewhere, in there, a little girl was waiting for her father to keep his promise. A weapon of mass murder was being armed, and a man who had thought himself a puppet master was about to learn the true meaning of revenge. The hunt wasn't just beginning. It was ending, and God help anyone who stood between John Mason and his daughter. The storm raged over the mining complex as Mason's team began their assault. Lightning strobed across the sky, and thunder masked the sound of their approach. Nature itself seemed to be providing cover for what was to come. Maria, initiate blackout. Protocol. Her fingers danced across her keyboard. Suddenly, the mine's external lighting failed, their backup generators sputtered and died, and every electronic system began behaving erratically. Blast doors cycled randomly. Security cameras showed looped footage, radio frequencies filled with static. Through their encrypted channel, Mason heard the confusion in the guards' communications. What's happening? Systems are going crazy. Lightning strike must have... The voice cut off as Reaper's first shot took out their communications array. Jake's rifle spoke next, systematically destroying vehicles in the parking area. No explosions, no casualties, just precision shots through engine blocks and fuel lines, eliminating any chance of escape. Mason moved through the chaos like a ghost, his radiation suit's matte black surface absorbing what little light remained. The first guard he encountered never even saw him, just felt a sudden pressure on his carotid artery before consciousness fled. East entrance secured, he whispered into his radio. Bill, you're up. Bill Thompson led Doc through the maintenance tunnel, their path guided by Carol's inside knowledge. Years of smuggling materials through these back channels were finally being turned against Petrov's operation. In her command post, Maria watched thermal signatures moving through the complex. Multiple hostiles converging on the power distribution. Center, they think it's a technical failure. Good. Mason's voice was cold. Keep them chasing ghosts. Jake, Reaper, Phase 2. The snipers began their carefully planned sequence of shots. Bullets ricocheted off metal surfaces, creating phantom sounds that echoed through the complex. Guards rushed toward the noise, only to find empty corridors. The complex's defenders were being herded like cattle, drawn away from critical locations. By an unseen hand, Mason reached the central junction, where 3 main tunnels converged. According to Bill's intelligence, the weapon would be in the deepest chamber, while Sarah was being held in Petrov's command center near the surface. Status on the package? He subvocalized into his comm. Thermal imaging shows heavy activity in the lower chamber, Maria reported. They're definitely accelerating the weapon assembly, but John, we've got movement topside, vehicles approaching, lots of them. Petrov's buyers, Mason realized. They're coming to see the demonstration. A new voice crackled over their channel. Carol Thompson speaking in hurried whispers. John, they're moving Sarah. Victor wants her present when the buyers arrive. Says it'll prove the targeting system works. Mason's blood ran cold. The bastard was going to demonstrate the weapon's genetic targeting capability on his daughter, showing his buyers how it would affect only specific bloodlines. Change of plans, he ordered. Doc, Carol will meet you at Junction B. Be ready to treat Sarah immediately. Maria, initiate the Thanatos protocol. John! Maria's voice held a note of warning. If I trigger that with you still inside, do it. Deep in the facility's network, Maria's most devastating virus came to life. Unlike the chaos-causing programs from earlier, this one had a single purpose. Systematically overload every pressure, valve, every cooling system, every safety mechanism in the complex. The mine would tear itself apart from the inside. Mason moved faster now, no longer bothering with stealth. Guards fell before they could raise alarms, his suppressed weapons striking with brutal efficiency. Each shot was precisely placed. These weren't soldiers following orders. They were criminals who had helped poison children. No mercy was given, none was deserved. He reached the upper levels just as Petrov's buyers arrived. Through the observation windows, he could see a convoy of expensive SUVs approaching through the rain. Men in suits mixed with private security contractors, all gathering for what they thought would be a simple weapons demonstration. Sarah was there, held firmly but carefully by Carol Thompson. The girl's face was pale but composed, her eyes constantly scanning her surroundings, just as Mason had taught her. When the first rumble of overloading machinery echoed through the complex, she allowed herself a small smile. She knew her father was coming. Viktor Petrov stood before his assembled buyers, his burned face gleaming in the emergency lighting. Gentlemen, what we offer today is not just a weapon, but a revolution in targeted warfare. Imagine genetic precision on a mass scale, the ability to eliminate specific bloodlines while leaving infrastructure intact. The facility shuddered. Again, warning lights began flashing throughout the complex. Sir, one of his technicians approached nervously. Something's wrong with the containment systems. Pressure is building in all chambers. Fix it, Petrov snarled. We have guests. That's when Mason made his move. The observation window exploded, inward as he burst through, tactical perfection in motion. His first shots eliminated Petrov's personal security detail before they could react. The second burst took out the lights, plunging the room into darkness, lit only by emergency strobes. Buyers and their security teams scrambled for cover, but found themselves caught in carefully planned fields of fire. Jake and Reaper's shots disabled weapons and communications devices with surgical precision. Hello, Victor. Mason's voice cut through the chaos. Been a while. Petrov spun toward the sound, his own weapon raised. Mason, always the dramatic entrance. Let her go, Mason advanced through the shadows. It's over. Over? Petrov laughed. My friend, it's just beginning. Even now, the weapon is being prepared. In 30 minutes, the entire region's water supply will be seeded with our little genetic time bomb. Your daughter is just the first test subject." Another tremor rocked the facility, stronger this time. Deep below, pressure gauges were reaching critical levels. "That's where you're wrong." Mason's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Your weapon is about to be buried under 1,000,000 tons of rock. Your buyers are about to learn they've walked into a trap. And you..." He emerged from the shadows directly behind Petrov, knife pressed to the Russian's throat. "You're about to answer for Rachel." Petrov's eyes widened. "The cancer? You finally figured it out?" "We had to test the delivery system, you see. Your wife's genetic profile was a perfect match for our targeting parameters." The knife bit slightly deeper. "Wrong answer!" The facility's warning sirens reached a fever pitch. The complex was coming. "Apart at the seams." "Carol," Mason called out, "get Sarah to dock, now." The girl looked at her father, understanding in her eyes. "Make him pay, Daddy." As Carol rushed Sarah to safety, Mason confronted his wife's murderer one last time. "Any last words?" Petrov smiled through his ruined face. "We are not so different, you and I. Both willing to burn the world for family." "No." Mason's voice was undean. "I protect family." The knife moved with surgical precision. "You just proved you never understood the difference." The complex's death throes reached their crescendo. Support beams groaned, pipes burst, and the earth itself seemed to be reclaiming the facility. Mason left Petrov's body where it fell, striding through the chaos as the mountain began to collapse. The buyers who had come to purchase genocide found themselves running for their lives, their vehicles destroyed, their phones and weapons useless. "All teams, clear the facility," he ordered. "Maria, send the evidence to every intelligence agency on the planet. Let them sort through these buyers' identities at their leisure." He emerged from the mine's entrance just as the final collapse began. Behind him, 3 years of planning, a weapon of mass murder, and the man who had destroyed his family were buried forever. Sarah was waiting with Doc, already receiving treatment. When she saw her father, she broke away and ran to him. Mason caught her in his arms, holding her close as the ground shook behind them. Together, they watched the mountain consume Viktor Petrov's legacy. "Mom would be proud," Sarah whispered. Mason kissed her forehead, his voice thick with emotion. Yes, she would." Lightning flashed one final time, illuminating father and daughter standing against the storm. Behind them, Mason's team gathered, warriors who had come when called, who had helped right a terrible wrong. The rain began to ease. The thunder grew distant, and in the darkness before dawn, a family broken by violence was finally made whole again by justice. The Delta Force commander had come home. 3 months after the mountain collapsed, spring came to Montana. Fresh wheat sprouted in the fields of Mason's rebuilt farm, its green shoots reaching toward the morning sun. The house was different, smaller, more modern, but still a home. Sarah sat on the new porch swing, working on her origami. Her health had fully returned, Doc's treatments having purged the last traces of polonium from her system. If anything, the experience had made her stronger, more resilient. Like her father, she had faced darkness and emerged unbroken. Mason watched her from the kitchen window as he prepared breakfast. The security cameras still monitored the perimeter. The defensive measures remained in place, but they were precautions. Now, not necessities. The threat had been buried with Petrov in that mountain tomb. The investigation into the weapon program had sent shockwaves through international intelligence communities. Maria's evidence had exposed dozens of corrupt officials, terminated multiple criminal enterprises, and prevented similar genetic targeting programs from being developed. The buyers who had survived the facility's collapse found themselves under intense scrutiny from their respective governments. The Thompsons had relocated to witness protection, their testimony crucial in dismantling what remained of Petrov's network. Before leaving, Carol had hugged Sarah goodbye, whispering apologies that the girl had answered with simple forgiveness. Children, Mason had learned, often understood the complexities of loyalty and redemption better than adults. His old team had dispersed again, returning to their civilian lives, but the bonds forged in combat had been renewed. They stayed in touch through secure channels, ready to reunite if ever needed. Some wounds, they had discovered, could only be healed by family, whether by blood or by choice. The sound of approaching vehicles caught Mason's attention. Black SUVs, government plates, but this time they were friendly. The real FBI, conducting their monthly check-in. The agent in charge was a good woman who had lost her own daughter to cancer. She understood what drove a father to burn down the world to protect his child. "Dad," Sarah's voice called from the porch, "can we have pancakes?" "Sure thing, sweetheart." Mason smiled, moving to the stove. The morning sun caught his wedding ring, the one he still wore in Rachel's memory. But the grief was different now, tempered by justice and healing. Life would never return to what it had been before Petrov's revenge scheme. Too much had changed. Too many secrets had been revealed. Sarah knew now what her father really was, what he was capable of, but instead of fear, it had fostered a deeper trust between them. She had seen the darkest side of him, and understood it had always been in service of love. The wheat fields stretched to the horizon, golden in the morning light. Somewhere out there, other threats might be gathering, other storms brewing, but for now there was peace. For now, there were pancakes to make and a daughter's laughter to cherish. Mason had been many things in his life: soldier, farmer, widower, killer. But as he watched Sarah practice her origami on the porch, creating delicate paper cranes like the one that had survived the war, he knew his most important role had always been simply father. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the last traces of dew. In the distance, meadowlarks sang their welcome to the new day. The farm had been rebuilt, stronger than before. The walls held different memories now, but they were still home. Sarah's voice drifted through the window again, humming a tune Rachel used to sing. Mason joined in softly, remembering his wife's smile, celebrating her justice, and thanking whatever forces had allowed him to keep their daughter safe. The Delta Force commander was still there, still vigilant, still ready. But for now, he was content to just be John Mason, making pancakes for his little girl on a peaceful Montana morning. After all, that had been the dream all along.